Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Robert Guffey. First, I have a couple of announcements. A great way to help support Forbidden Knowledge News is by downloading our episodes directly through Spreaker or our website. Also, you can get a Rokfin premium membership. With that membership, you get access to not only all our premium content, but all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. You can also get Forbidden Knowledge News 5 days a week on Rokfin, Rumble, and our website. The website is forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some incredible podcasts there. And you can always get every new episode of Forbidden Knowledge News on Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. Today I want to welcome Robert Guffey. He is an author of several books, articles, and publications, as well as a lecturer in the Department of English at California State University. Robert, welcome. How you doing?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. I have very much been looking forward to this. This is going to be a great episode. We're going to be discussing your book, Chameleo, the strange but true story of invisible spies, heroin addiction, and homeland security. And I've mentioned this book several times to my audience since I read it a few months ago. And this is one of the most incredible and insane stories I've ever heard. And I highly recommend everyone listening go and pick up your copy right now. The links are right in the description. And I want to get to as much as we can because, like I said, this is an awesome story. Before we get into it, though, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what was it that led you to write this particular book?
Okay, sure. If I may, I'd like to take the liberty of dedicating this episode to the late Ken Thomas, who just passed away. Ken Thomas wrote the book The Octopus, Secret Government and the Death of Danny Casolaro with Jim Keefe, who also passed away many years ago. But Ken Thomas passed away on September 22nd, and he published one of my early articles in Steam Shovel Press, which was his magazine. It was one of the very best DIY zines of the 1990s. So yes, Ken Thomas, he just passed away. So I wanted to take note of that.
Yeah. Excellent.
And if you haven't read The Octopus, which is all about the Inslaw affair and the mysterious death of Danny Casolaro, I highly recommend it. So how I came to write Chameleo, that's a complicated story, as you know. But I'll try to encapsulate it as best as I can. It all started in July of 2003. And my friend Damien, who in the book, in Chameleo, I call him Dion Fuller, but that's not his real name. And it's too hard for me to remember the made-up name, so I'm just going to call him Damien. I asked him, "Do you mind if I just call you Damien in these interviews?" And he's like, "That's fine." Yeah. So Damien, who I've known since I was 16. In fact, I met him on my 16th birthday. In July of 2003, he was living in the Pacific Beach area of San Diego. I was living in Torrance, California. And at the time, Damien, he had just broken up with a girlfriend, and his house had become kind of a drug house, right? People are coming in and out all the time. And there's this kid, he meets this kid who had gone AWOL from Camp Pendleton, but Damien didn't know he had gone AWOL from Camp Pendleton. He was just this kid that he met, and the kid asked him, "Hey, can I crash here for a few days?" And Damien said, "Sure," which was not an unusual thing for Damien to do. So this kid, who said his name was Lee, is crashing on Damien's couch. Now, when he went AWOL from Camp Pendleton, he took with him a 9mm Iraqi gun, over 24 pairs of high-tech night vision goggles, a DoD laptop computer, and an entire truck.
And this was in the early or mid 90s? What was the approximate time frame?
So it's happening 2003. So we're talking just a couple of years after 9/11.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I sometimes when I do these interviews, people will ask, well, how the hell did he steal a whole truck from Camp Pendleton? But if you look into it, look up a documentary called Cul-de-sac, which came out oddly enough around like 2004, and in fact factors into the book. I mentioned the documentary Cul-de-sac in Chameleo. Cul-de-sac is all about an incident that occurred in the same exact area, in the Pacific Beach area of San Diego, only a couple of years before all this happens to Damien. And this guy stole a whole tank from an armory and just took it on a joyride right down the middle of the suburban streets of Pacific Beach, going over like fire hydrants and RVs, and went all the way out onto the freeway, and eventually got stuck in the middle of the freeway. And he wanted to, ostensibly, he wanted to take the tank and go to City Hall, make a statement about something. Which I think that whatever was happening to that guy is what I'm about to describe started happening to Damien. But that if you can actually go to Google or go to YouTube, just punch in tank San Diego, you'll see the footage of this.
Yeah.
And when the tank gets stuck on the freeway, you see all the cops are they're just pushing each other out of the way to get the opportunity to like climb onto that thing and shoot the guy in the head, even though he was unarmed, except for the tank. But by that point, the tank had gotten stuck and he wasn't going anywhere with it. And he was just wearing like a pair of shorts and no shirt, and they shot him in the head. So this guy stole a whole tank. So I don't think it's that weird that this dude stole a truck from Camp Pendleton. And apparently Camp Pendleton, by the way, I on my blog, Cryptoschatology, I've got a whole bunch of different articles about high strangeness going on at Camp Pendleton. In fact, I was thinking of doing a whole separate article just about the weirdness that occurs at Camp Pendleton. And just recently, there was a whole article about, this is from the July 6, 2023 NBCSanDiego.com report. The headline is Family says missing girl located in Camp Pendleton barracks. Marine questioned by NCIS. So this guy was keeping this missing girl in his barracks. So they would have had to have taken this underage girl like right past the security, and they were like, "Go ahead, it's okay." So I guess all sorts of illicit activity is going on Camp Pendleton, coming off the base and going into the base. So in this case, what was going off the base was the truck, the DoD laptop computer, the over 24 pairs of high-tech night vision goggles, and the 9mm Iraqi gun. And so some of the stuff was in Damien's house, some of it wasn't. And one night, Damien's having this party, and there's all these people there. And the kid, Lee, pulls out the laptop and opens it, and immediately the DoD symbol appears on the screen. And Damien sees this and immediately says, "Okay, get this shit out of here and just leave."
Yeah.
And the kid's like, "No, don't worry about it. They can't track this stuff." And it was like on cue. Just a few minutes later, there's a knock at the door. Damien opens it. There's a woman there who identifies herself as Special Agent Lita Johnson of the NCIS. That's not her real name. And there's like two goons with her, and she says, I need to search your apartment. And Damien, whose father was a narcotics cop, so he kind of knew a little bit about his rights, he said to her, "Well, do you have a warrant?" And she said, "No, I do not have a warrant, but I can get it very quickly." He said, "Well, come back with a warrant," and he closes the door in her face. He immediately spins around and tells everyone, "Okay, grab your shit," meaning your drugs, and leave, go out the back. Everyone throws their drugs down. Now that they sense heat is near, so they just like throw their drugs down on Damien's carpet and like run out at the back. Lee is still there. The NCIS come back like very quickly right after that, along with the San Diego Police Department. But Damien, the way he described it was like the San Diego Police Department and NCIS, it was almost as if they weren't working together. They were really like bumping heads. He described it as like Keystone Cops kind of stuff. Yeah. And they didn't care at all about all the drugs littering the living room floor. They were hyper focused on getting back these night vision goggles. They weren't too concerned about all the other stuff. They were really wanted to know about these night vision goggles. So they arrest Damien and they arrest this kid Lee, who they later told Damien that his name wasn't Lee, that his name was Doyle. So he has multiple names. So they throw Damien and this kid Lee in jail for about 6 or 7 days, and for about a whole week they're giving Damien the Abu Ghraib treatment. They're like really working on him, and they want him to tell them everything he knows about this kid, and they've come to the conclusion that this kid and Damien are somehow in league with each other, selling stolen equipment to like Al Qaeda or some other terrorist organization. And Damien's trying to tell them, look, I just met this guy like a few days ago. I didn't even know what the hell his name was until just now. I don't know anything about this. And they didn't accept that. How is it possible that this guy was sleeping on your couch, but you were not involved with all this other stuff? They couldn't like wrap their head around the idea that a guy would just like let someone he just met, just like live in his house. So for some reason they couldn't accept that was the reality of it. And also I should point out that Damien is not the most cooperative person anyway, particularly when it comes to dealing with law enforcement. I think this probably has something to do with the fact that his dad was a narcotics cop and he didn't really get along with his dad. So even if he had known something about Lee and what he was doing, he probably wouldn't have said anything anyway. But the fact is, he really didn't know anything. So this is like a total Franz Kafka scenario. And so they keep grilling him. And then it was around this time that, we would talk frequently. And I tried to call him on the phone, and the phone just rang and rang. And after a few days, like, he still wasn't getting back in touch with me, which I thought was odd. Then, a week passes, and finally he calls me on the phone, and he tells me everything that has just happened. And he said that they let him go. After about a week of grilling him, they finally said that he could go. And both of us thought, well, wow, that's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. It can't get weirder than that. Obviously, they realized that he didn't know anything. They let him go, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Then, right. And then like a few days later, he calls me and he says he's being followed. And at first I thought he meant like followed surreptitiously by a couple of people, who maybe were following him to see if maybe he did have something to do with it, But then it became clear that what he was saying was, no, they're not like following me surreptitiously. They're like whole groups of people. Like I'm talking like a dozen, what he described as jarhead looking guys, like, real jarhead military looking dudes, following him all around, not in a surreptitious way, but being very blatant about it, almost as if they wanted him to see that they were following him. And he said, I would go into the 7-Eleven over on Garnett Avenue, and a dozen of these jarheads would just follow me right on my ass, like winding through the aisle. They'd be right there. I'd go to the Mexican restaurant. They'd all sit in the booth around me and like just be staring at him as he's eating like a chalupa or whatever. And at first, when he's describing this, I thought, okay, I've never heard of anything like this before. I mean, I've heard of people being followed, but I've never heard of people being followed like this. And at first, I admit that I thought that maybe Damien was having some sort of like meth-induced paranoia. Not that, Damien's drug of choice had always been heroin, which isn't a hallucinogen. But I thought, well, maybe, and I'd never seen him really paranoid before. But I thought, well, maybe this is some sort of strange new reaction to whatever he's taking. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I go, why don't you try to like document this stuff? I mean, if they're following you, like maybe take photos of them following you or something like that. So he says there's cars. Now there's cars following him all around Pacific Beach. I go, well, take photos of the license plates. He begins to tell me that they're parking outside his apartment like at all hours of the day and night, and they'll just like play music, cranked up to 11, like right outside his front door, or they'll like be shining halogen lights like all night, like right through the window of his bedroom. And I go, well, okay, why don't you take photos of these cars that are following you around? So he actually does that, and it just so happened that I had a friend who worked at the DMV up in Washington State. So I sent, and the list of these license plate numbers is in the book. I sent the list of these numbers to this guy I know at the DMV, and he runs them through the system, and they all come back as officially non-existent, which I thought was odd because, of course, if Damien was having just some sort of paranoid reaction to something, then they would come up as license plates, owned by his neighbors, right? Who were just driving around town, and he was misinterpreting it as them following him, but it would come up. And even if he was just making up license plate numbers just at random, you think you'd hit on an actual car. And anyway, I knew they existed because I'd seen the photographs. So the fact that they came back as officially non-existent just seemed to suggest to me that these were government vehicles. I couldn't think of any other reason why they wouldn't be coming up. So that it was at that point I thought, okay, well, so maybe there's some reality to all of this. I should point out that so Lita Johnson, the NCIS agent, she would just show up from time to time. And all these people are like parked outside Damien's house doing all this stuff. Then they would like pull back, and then suddenly another car would pull in, and Lita Johnson would get out with her like two goons, and she'd go to the door and knock at the door and say, "Oh, hi, Damien. I was just wondering, have you changed your mind? Have you remembered anything useful that might help us in our investigation?" And Damien would say, "No, because I told you before I didn't know anything then, and I don't know anything now, so what can I possibly add to your investigation?" And then "Oh, that's unfortunate. Well, if you remember anything," she gives him her card, "call me at this number if you remember anything." And then she gets in the car, drives away, and then right after she would leave, all these other cars would just come back, and the whole thing would just start all over again. And I should also point out that he's living in Pacific Beach, which was in walking distance of all of these interesting corporations like SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation, and ATC, American Technology Corporation, which specialize in creating exotic weaponry. Non-lethal weapons, like Colonel John Alexander calls them non-lethal weapons. Of course, they'll kill you, but they're non-lethal weapons. Electromagnetic weapons, acoustic bullets, things like this is what they specialized in. These corporations were located literally within walking distance of where Damien was living. So one night I'm talking to Damien on the phone, and suddenly, as I'm talking to him, I hear this crash, the sounds of like glass shattering. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? And Damien is now crouched under his table, cradled in a ball with the phone next to him. And I'm hearing all this chaos going on in the background. And he's saying that all the tchotchkes up on the mantle are like just shattering, seemingly for no reason. And Damien's not. I mean, he had been homeless in Washington D.C. He'd been in and out of jail, and because his father was a narcotics cop, they'd always put him in they considered him to be at risk from the other inmates because his father was a cop. So he would always end up in the same cell block as whatever celebrity was there at the same time. So like in LA, he was on the same cell block with the Menendez brothers and OJ, like back in the early 90s. And then And then around this time, just before all this, he had been arrested and thrown into jail in Maryland, and he was on the same block with Mike Tyson. He used to check out books to Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson would come into the library and check out books on the Nation of Islam and things like that, and Damien would check these books out to him. So he'd been in and out of prison. He'd been around the block a few times, so he's not someone who gets scared easily. But during this incident, he was like reduced to crying like a little girl as these things were shattering all around him. And he said to me, if not for the whole context of all this, if not for having been arrested and taken to the jail, if not for having been interrogated by the NCIS and all this, he would have thought that his house was haunted.
Yeah.
He would have thought that there was a poltergeist in his house, because that's exactly what it looked like,
Yeah. Now,
so
didn't he also have some sort of altercations with these mobs and set like booby traps for them or similar to that?
Well, there was the food fight with the feds. I think that was the first time he actually tried to engage with them. He's in his kitchen, and they would have these jarhead guys like stationed, posted right on the other side of the fence that was on the other side of his kitchen window. So Damien's there like making lunch, and there'd be these two guys, and they'd be very loudly talking to one another about him. Now, again, this sounds like classic, paranoia, like some sort of schizophrenic break, right? So these two guys are talking to each other about him, like insulting him, as if he's not there. And so Damien takes down from the cupboard a bunch of like Bisquick, some Jello, pasta sauce, peanut butter, mayonnaise, and he like mixes it all into this nice thick goo, and then he suddenly darts outside and he just like dumps it all over the wooden fence, and it goes into the hair of these two jarhead guys, and they run off into the parking lot of the Vons trying to get this stuff off of them. I mentioned that because I'm going to bring it up again later, by the way.
Yeah.
It's actually a significant moment. So all this stuff is going on, and he describes to me what I at first he was calling hallucinations, but that's actually not the proper word for it. But he at one point he opened his window, and outside the window was scenery that had never been there before. It was like this surreal alien landscape, like a Boris Vallejo painting, like with three moons in the sky. Yeah. And it was like, what the hell? Like, did the apartment did it suddenly get teleported to another planet? What the hell? What's happening? And he opens the door, and everything is fine. It's the parking lot of the Vons, etc. Everything looks as it normally would. Close the door, look out the window, and it looks like he's on another planet or something, some other dimension.
Yeah.
And then there was one night where he was in bed, and they projected this silhouette of a hand with a gun in it, and it would like tilt down. The silhouette on the wall would tilt down, so it looked like the gun was pointing at his head, and then it would tilt up again. The same night he had thrown his leather jacket on the carpet, and he watched as this black amorphous energy crawled across the carpet and then crawled into the leather jacket, and the leather jacket kind of filled up as this black amorphous energy entered it, and then the leather jacket crawled across the floor, and then the stuff just sort of dissipated. What's interesting about that is I was on a TV show called Transcending Reality, which was hosted by 4 alien abductees, 4 people who claimed to be alien abductees. And one of them was Melinda Leslie. Another one was a woman named Misha Johnson, and there were 2 other people. And they were interviewing me about all this. And you can actually see it. If you go to YouTube and put in like Transcending Reality, Robert Guffey, I think it will come up. When I mentioned this part to them, Melinda turned to Misha and said, "Oh, we've seen that, the black amorphous energy," and they all nodded as if it was just something like, as if I had mentioned going down to get a carton of milk at the supermarket. Like, it was like totally, oh yes, we've seen that. We've seen that amorphous black blob energy crawling across the floor. So I thought it was interesting that these 4 people who all claim to be alien abductees have seen the same phenomenon, when we know in Damien's situation, he doesn't claim that he was abducted by aliens, right? And yet they were seeing the same phenomenon. So I think that's interesting. So then things get stranger from there, because he starts telling me that there are invisible people in his house, and that they're interacting with him, like pushing him over, touching him. And he tells me that he's in the bathroom, and he's the bathroom mirror, which is on a hinge and you can open it, and the medicine cabinet is inside, right? He's opening the bathroom mirror, and as the mirror was in motion, he could briefly see one of these, quote, invisible, unquote, people behind him. And he said that they were very small. This person was very small, as in like the size of as he described it, like a jockey, small and slender, and in this kind of like weird, like head to toe skin tight suit. But he only could see it for like a half a second. And I thought, okay, if this is some sort of like technology, like light bending technology, maybe it would make sense that moving the mirror would affect it and you'd be able to see it. And Damien's not an optical physicist. He wouldn't have thought of that. But as he was describing this to me, I thought that kind of makes some sort of sense, He said occasionally he would see them as these little dots in the air, like little auras, kind of like what some people see when they suffer from very serious migraines. Sometimes they see these aura dots in the air. He said that's what it looked like, but kind of like the outline of a small person, And so while all this is going on, he also has this. One day he describes that he has this what he described as like a waking dream, really like missing time. I once again I was trying to call him. Several months have passed by this point. He's losing weight. He's urinating blood. He has like a constant metallic taste in his mouth. And he has this incident where I tried to call him. I couldn't get a hold of him. Like 3 days passed. Finally, I get a hold of him. And I go, where have you been? And he goes, what are you talking about? I go, well, I've been calling for 3 days. And he goes, I haven't gone anywhere. I've been right here. And figure out that like 3 days had passed and he hadn't been aware of it. And he had what he described as a waking dream where he was sitting on the couch in the middle of the afternoon, and these guys came into the apartment in this dream, quote, dream, unquote, that he had. These people came into the apartment, and he said in the dream he crossed his arms over his chest like in an X formation as they tried to pry his arms off, and then they injected him with something. And I thought it was interesting that, like I said, his drug of choice was heroin. So he had no problem with needles. He didn't have any fear of needles at all. And yet here he is having this like weird nightmarish situation with someone coming in and like sticking a needle in his arm. And so he has like 3 days of missing time, which, like classic alien abduction phenomenon as well, right? Like going all the way back to Betty and Barney Hill, missing time, right? And when that happened, obviously all of this is concerning, right?
Hello, friends. I want to tell you about the incredible benefits of IGF-1. The older we get, the less IGF is produced by our body naturally. When you're born, you have tons of it, and it's why you feel great in your 20s. The great news is that you can replenish it. Just like multivitamins that you take every day, you can supplement the natural IGF levels in your body. You can do that with clinically proven IGF-1 Plus from Neutronics Labs. This is the stuff that helps you regain IGF-1 and feel great. Just spray it into your mouth a couple of times a day and boom. Lean muscle gain, healthy weight loss, more restful sleep, positive energy gain, crystal clear thinking, all of these things. These are the benefits of proper levels of IGF in your system, which naturally you lose over time. Go do the research on your own at neutronicslabs.com. You can get incredible benefits when you put the product on auto ship, and you can cancel anytime. You should try their IGF for at least 3 months to see the positive results. Click the link in the description and use code FKN to save 15%, as well as buy one, get one free with auto ship. Order now at neutronicslabs.com.
And by the way, all of his neighbors move out. He's living in an apartment on a Hornblende Avenue, and slowly all of his neighbors move out, one by one, and new people come in. And when the first person who ever interviewed me about Chameleo was Tessa Dick, who was Phil Dick's widow. Phil Dick, the science fiction writer who wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became Blade Runner and Total Recall and Man in the High Castle, et cetera, et cetera. And he wrote a book called Valis, V-A-L-I-S, in the early 80s. That's probably his masterpiece. And that book is based on these strange experiences he had throughout the 70s, where he and Tessa were being harassed and having similar experiences as what I'm describing. And when Tessa Dick read Chameleo, she said, "Thank you for writing this book. It completely explains so many things that happened to me and Phil in Orange County back in the 70s. She said, like, the apartment building they were living in, everyone moved out. And these new people moved in next door, and they would watch them moving weird machinery into the apartment next door to where they lived. And she said, sometimes the radio, and she goes, I actually saw this happen. The voices would come through the radio insulting Phil. Again, that sounds like a classic paranoid, schizophrenic kind of breakdown scenario. But Tessa Dick said, I also heard the voices, and when we looked at the radio, it wasn't plugged into the wall. So I think it's interesting that there's parallels there as well. So when he has this weird, around the time he has this weird missing time experience, just before that, I actually, because I still wasn't quite sure if this was happening or not, right? You know, because I'm not there, not physically there. I'm leaning towards thinking that he's not crazy, but I'm not sure. So I go, you know, didn't that NCIS woman, didn't she leave you a card? And he said, yes. I go, why don't you give me the phone number? So I'm going to call her. So he gives me the phone number. I call her, and the transcription of that conversation is in the book. Mm-hmm. And when I call her, she's very nonplussed. She seems very offended that someone is calling her and asking her questions. My name's Robert Guffey. I live in Torrance. I have a friend, Damien, who lives in Pacific Beach. I believe you know him. She confirmed, yes, I do know him. I go, are you, he claims that you're following him. And she immediately responds with, no one in my agency is currently following your friend, which I thought was like such a bizarre, broken-backed, convoluted sentence. It's like doing calisthenics with language. For a brain to come up with, all you have to say is yes or no, right? No. No one in my agency is currently following your friend. It is such like legalese, right? Like really CYA kind of language. It's probably true. Probably no one in her agency was following him because she's farming it out to other people, right? Retired law enforcement, retired military, private security agencies, all this kind of stuff. So no one in my agency is currently following your friend. Oh, okay. So then it's okay if he leaves town then? And she goes, I would prefer that he not do that. And I go, well, he's not under investigation, right? And she's like, no, he's not under investigation. And I go, so it's okay if he leaves town? Oh, no, I would prefer they not do that. Why? It just might make things difficult later on. It doesn't make any sense. He's not under investigation, but you don't want him to leave town because it might make things difficult later on. It doesn't make any sense. The whole conversation is in the book, and it didn't end well. I mean, she basically implied that Damien was crazy. And oh, by the way, before that, an interesting event occurs where Damien calls me and he says, this is like, I'm going out of my mind. I need this all to end. Like, I can't deal with this anymore. He had heard some rumor through some friends of his that maybe these night vision goggles that Lee had somehow ended up in the hands of the Hells Angels, and they were using it to using the night vision goggles to smuggle drugs over the border between San Diego and Mexico. So Damien said, maybe I could offer to Lita Johnson that maybe I could help them retrieve the night vision goggles, and then they'll leave me alone. And I go, I don't think that's a good idea. They're just going to think you knew where they were all along, and that this is some kind of shakedown. And he's like, no, I think it'll be fine. So he calls them and meets with Lita Johnson and her superior. This is how serious they were taking the situation. Lita Johnson meets with Damien at a bagel shop on Garnett Avenue. There's only one bagel shop on Garnett Avenue. So if you're in Pacific Beach area, you'll know exactly. You can go exactly to where this meeting took place. Damien meets with Lita Johnson and her superior at this bagel shop. They buy him an orange juice and a bagel. And as they're sitting there, Lita Johnson says something that I think is a really interesting kind of keyhole into her consciousness and also the consciousness of the people she's working for. She's talking about how she grew up in Pacific Beach. It was always such a nice place. Really upstanding, patriotic people lived here. And now it's just filled with a bunch of scumbags and drug addicts. And we need to like clean up. Yeah. We need to clean up the town. Now, Damien has this kind of like Candide-like quality to him where sometimes he's not aware of when he's being insulted. So it's obvious to me that she was talking about him. But Damien's not getting that. And he says to her, oh, I absolutely agree. I hate those kind of people. We really need to, maybe we can band together and like deal with this problem. That's why I'm here. I'm offering my services to you. Well, how much do you pay? And I could see Lita Johnson, like her blood pressure rising as Damien's not getting that she's insulting him. And when he proposes that they like put him on the payroll so that he can help them retrieve the night vision goggles, her superior just gets red faced, and he's like, I don't negotiate with terrorists. Slams his fist down on the table, and he's like, yeah, you're welcome for the bagel and the orange juice, as if the cost of the bagel and the orange juice is equal to the amount of psychic and physical trauma caused by months of electronic harassment and all the other nonsense that all the unconstitutional surveillance and harassment, as if the bagel and the orange juice somehow makes up for all of that. And Damien just like, he flips out on him. It didn't end well. But in the middle of it, in the middle of the conversation, Damien says to them, listen, I just want to, I don't want to have any more food fights with the feds. And Lita laughs, and she goes, oh, that made us all laugh. And it was like the one moment where the emerald curtain was pulled back, and she actually admitted that he was being surveilled, because the whole point of the operation is to make the target think that they're going crazy. Yeah. And you think, oh, well, Jesus, maybe I'm not being followed. Like maybe I'm just going out of my mind. But she actually, and I love this because it's such a human reaction. She just couldn't help it. She just involuntarily laughed and said, oh, yes, that made us all laugh. Like, yeah, it was really funny when he threw all that fucking goo in the jarhead's face. That was really hilarious. And so that meeting, it didn't end well. And he goes back and he tells me what happened. And I said, well, I could have told you that that's how it was going to end. But so it's sometime after that, that the missing time occurs. He has the weird waking dream.
Now, let me ask you,
then,
he never got his hands on the little jockey-like people. He was never able to capture one of these guys, right?
He actually, one of these guys actually fell out of the tree outside his house, and he actually went out and was like throwing like flour on him.
Oh, wow.
And another point where he was at the beach, and he could actually see, because it's not just this optical camouflage technology, which we'll go into later.
Yeah.
It doesn't just make people invisible. You can make vehicles invisible as well. He on the beach, he actually could see tracks forming in the sand on the beach as this vehicle was following him around on the beach. I don't recall him ever saying that he actually they touched him though.
Yeah.
I mean, he had physical contact with them because they pushed him over. So it was around that time during like the missing time thing that he meets this beachcomber dude at the beach who's selling a van, got this black Punisher mobile van that he's selling cheap for like $500 or something. And Damien, his wallet goes missing around the time of the missing dream thing. He can't find his wallet. He was going to buy this van, and I thought, when he's telling me he's got metallic taste in his mouth, he's urinating blood, and then the missing time thing with the weird waking dream, I thought, okay, something has to be done about this. So without even asking him, I sent him via Western Union enough money to buy the van. And I call him on the phone, and I said, listen, I just Western Union you whatever it was, $500, $600, whatever it was, to buy the van. And when you send someone money via Western Union, you have to give them a code, and then they go to Western Union, they give them the password, and then the password, so they don't just give the money to just anybody, right? So I came up with a password, which was kind of like an inside joke between the two of us that was like pornographic in nature, which you can see in the book. I was going to give him the password over the phone. He goes, no, don't give it to me. He was scared that whoever was listening, was going to go and get the money first before he could get there. He goes, let me pack up everything, and then I'll call back and you give me the password. And I go, okay. So he packs up all the stuff, and then he calls me back, and I'm just about to give him the password, and the phone just cuts off, just dies. And I was like, what? Okay, well, maybe that was just a coincidence. So I call back. I'm about to give him the password. It just cuts off again. Same exact moment. I call back a third time, same thing. And I go, this is unbelievable, right? So I remembered that when you place a collect call to someone, there's a brief moment where the operator says, will you accept the charges? There's a brief moment when you can hear each other. So I placed a collect call to him, and the operator said, will you accept the charges? As she was saying that, I yelled out a hint as to what the password was, and I briefly heard Damien laugh because I knew he had heard me and understood what it meant, and then it just died again. He was able to go to the Western Union. He knew what the right password was. He gets the money. He buys the van from the dude at the beach. He comes back. He starts piling everything into the van. Now he goes to tell his landlord that he's leaving for good, and the landlord couldn't be more relieved. The landlord looked like worse than Damien. Damien is losing weight this entire time. The landlord's also losing weight. He's like losing air. He's like completely going out of his mind. And he was like, "Oh, thank God." He was actually said, "Thank God that you're leaving." Damien puts a note on the door saying, "I've gone west," which would have been right into the ocean. And then he gets into his car, he gets into the van, and he leaves. Now, we thought, oh, well, and a lot of people who've been through this similar experience think that if they just leave town, it'll end. And that doesn't happen. It doesn't end. Damien calls me from a phone booth. So at this point, 6 months have passed. We're now into early 2004 when he leaves. And he calls me from a phone booth to tell me that there's like a little circular craft that's following the van. Now, keep in mind, this is 2004. Drones are total science fiction at this point. They do not exist. Well, they don't exist commercially at this point. and so he's describing something that sounds like a tiny flying saucer trailing the van. You know, and it's like, you know, what's next? You know, and he goes. He takes the van all the way up into Texas. He briefly meets Soupy Sale's son. That's a whole. That's in the book. Yeah. He and he's driving all around with this circular little thing following him around the whole time. At one point, he stops off at a bathroom in Minnesota, and he goes. This is the second time when the emerald curtain is pulled back. He goes into the bathroom. He's washing his hands as he's about to leave, and this guy comes in and is washing his hands at the sink right next to him. And the guy turns to him and says, "If you'd give it all back, this could all end." And he didn't say it in like a threatening, ominous way. It was more like a pleading tone, like please give the stuff back so this can all end for me, like so I don't have to keep following you around everywhere. And right after he said that, another guy comes in and grabs that guy by the collar and like drags him out of the bathroom, as if the first guy had broken protocol or something. Like you're not supposed to engage, you know. So that freaks out Damien. He at one point he stops off in Minnesota to see he had a child with an ex-girlfriend, and they were no longer together, but she was living with the son in Minnesota, and she tells him that these two guys showed up to tell him, if you see Damien, let us know, contact us at this number. And she's like, is he wanted for something? Oh, no. But, you know, he's been talking about doing things. You know, it's like very like vague but ominous. He's been talking about doing things, you know. He at one point, his van breaks down on the side of the road, somewhere around like Kansas. And these two good old boys stopped off to help him fix the van, and they couldn't fix it right away, so they suggest bringing him back to their house. And I get a phone call like at 10:30 at night, and there's this voice I've never heard before, this guy with a thick like Southern accent. Yeah. And the guy goes, are you Professor Guffey? And I go, yeah. And he goes, you know Damien? And I go, like what's happening now? And he proceeds to say that Damien's van broke down. They couldn't fix it, but they brought him back to their house, and that this guy Damien told us this really weird story about invisible midgets and little flying saucers and you know, weird black energy crawling across the floor. What's wrong with this guy? Is he possessed by demons? Like these two guys thought that Damien was like possessed by some evil entity, and that they needed to like exorcise it from him. Oh shit! And I explained to them. I go, no, actually, everything he's saying is perfectly correct. And I told the guy a kind of shortened version of everything I've just told you. Yeah. And he still sounds maybe like a tiny bit skeptical. As I'm talking to him on the phone, he turns to his buddy, and he's like, you know, Jeb, or whatever the hell the guy's name was, come over here. As I'm talking to the guy on the phone, they look out the window of their house, and there's a little drone flying saucer hovering outside that followed them from the spot where the black van had broken down. And these two guys are like going out of their mind now. Oh shit! And I said, I go, look, this is why he's in the van. while he's driving around. I go, if you could fix the van, that would be fantastic. So he could just keep going. And so I actually convinced them to fix the van, and they fixed it. He ends up in this little tiny town called Winona, Kansas, which has like 100 people living in it. Maybe a little more than that, but not that many. And for some reason, when he got to Winona, Kansas, the harassment just stopped. Now, I don't know if it's because it was such a small town that people are going to notice a parade of jarheads following this guy right through the middle of Winona, Kansas. I mean, it's not like San Diego or LA or New York where you could be surveilled and harassed forever and no one would even notice it, right?
Yeah.
And this is like a tiny town. So I don't know if they pulled back because of that or because everyone in Winona, Kansas has guns and this optical camouflage technology, it's not bulletproof. Yeah. So maybe that's why. Or maybe they just pulled back so that later on they could pull the rug out from under him and say, oh, you thought everything had stopped, but it hadn't. For whatever reason, the harassment ends when he gets to Winona, Kansas. He's actually able to kind of pause, collect his thoughts a bit. He actually gets a house in Winona, and he gets a job, and as he's there, and he's kind of allowed to have some breathing room. He's going on the internet. He's scouring the internet, looking for anything that explains what he has seen in regards to these invisible people. And he comes across an article about this guy in Japan named Professor Tashi, who had invented something that he called an invisibility cloak. Yeah. But that didn't look like it because it only makes the person invisible from one angle. This was not that. What he was seeing was like 360 degrees, and finally he stumbles across this website called Chameleo.net, and there's this guy named Richard Schoengert who has a top secret clearance, and he's a 33rd degree Freemason, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in Long Beach, and he describes this technology that he's created, and it sounds very similar. He's reading the patent and everything. It sounds like Damien thinks this is the closest to what he experienced. And he tells me, go look at this website. And I look at it, and I'm surprised to see there's like an About Me section where Richard says, he works at Northrop Grumman. He's worked in the defense industry for decades. He has a top secret clearance. And this Chameleo optical camouflage project is like a private endeavor on his part. It's not something he's doing in connection to the government. And he also mentions that he's a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in Long Beach. Now, I am a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in Long Beach. So I suddenly realized that I have to have, we're part of the same lodge. Like I had to have met this guy at some point, but I don't remember meeting him. And I sent him an email. I go, look, my name's Robert Guffey. I'm a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason in Long Beach. I go, I'm a writer. I've interviewed people. I've interviewed people like Bishop Stephen Heller, who's the bishop of the Gnostic Church in LA. I've done articles about Gnosticism and other, esoteric things. And I'd like to interview you about your technology. He writes back, and maybe he writes back because I said I was in the same lodge as him. He writes back and he says, "You're sure? Yeah, we can get together. I know Bishop Heller. I've been to the Gnostic Church. Let's meet at the lodge next Saturday." So I called Damien and I go, he wants to meet with me. I'm going to interview him on Saturday. And Damien goes, I'm going to be there. So he'd been having some sort of dispute with his landlord. So he bought a bunch of wet cement and poured it down the drains in the kitchen sink and in the bathroom sink and in the bathtub before just taking off. He gets into the van and then drives back all the way to Long Beach, and he meets with me the day before. And we decide that I'm going to go to the Scottish Rite Saturday morning. I'll meet Richard. Then afterwards, me and Damien are going to take Richard to lunch. So I go there, I meet Richard, and I suddenly realized that I had never met him formally, but I had seen him performing the rituals because he had a very distinctive voice, and I immediately recognized his voice. And he's, nice to meet you. We'll meet after the rituals. So we do, and it's like now it's lunchtime. He takes me out into the parking lot where his car is. His license plate says Chameleo on it. I say, well, we're going to meet. I go, this is my friend Damien. We're going to take you to George's Greek Cafe on Pine Avenue in Long Beach. So we take him there. We have lunch. He's a very interesting guy. But I have to say, I did not think that anything Richard was going to say was going to tie in with Damien's situation. I really didn't. I thought that was like the biggest long shot in the world. But I thought maybe I would get some sort of interesting interview out of it anyway. So we decide we're going to conduct the interview in my office on campus at CSU Long Beach, where I teach. So we meet him there. We sit down. I start the interview. And before Damien ever even says a word to him about his situation, we haven't said anything about it yet. Richard starts talking about his technology. Everything he says just lines up perfectly with everything that Damien has already described to me. He just offhandedly begins the interview by mentioning that he's already initiated a lawsuit against the military because he believes that they stole this optical camouflage technology from him. He mentions that he had met with the Navy. He'd taken them to his laboratory that he shared with Dr. Lev Berger, an eminent physicist out in Hemet, and had showed them the whole proposal. The Navy was very interested, extremely interested. And in fact, I have paperwork. James R. Hogg, Admiral in the U.S. Navy, wrote to Richard, and I'm holding the letter in my hands. Dear Mr. Schoengert, the CNO Strategic Studies Group thanks you for your informative thoughts regarding Project Chameleo. Your insights on adaptive camouflage and its applications to the maritime force have stimulated the group's thinking in dealing with this critical topic. We would also like to thank Dr. Lev Berger for the views and comments and the tour of his laboratory. The open exchange of ideas and your candid observations will clearly aid in our work. Thanks for your strong support of the SSG. Sincerely, James R. Hogg, Admiral, U.S. Navy. And there's other documentation of this. They meet with the Navy. The Navy seems extremely interested until a certain point, and then they kind of just go silent. Then he's approached by SAIC, Special Applications International Corporation, which is one of those corporations I mentioned, was based in San Diego, just within walking distance of Damien's apartment. They met with Richard, and Richard took them out to the laboratory, and they seemed extremely interested as well. But then nothing, just silence. They would just go cold. And he tells us about this. He tells us you can use this kind of technology for all kinds of different things. He goes, in fact, a part of the original patent, and I should note that Richard Schoengert is documented the first person to be awarded a patent in optical camouflage technology. Richard said in the original patent, he goes, you could use this not just to make soldiers invisible on the battlefield, but you could also use this for psychological warfare purposes. He goes, you could use this to make people think that they're on another planet, or that a tree is actually an elephant. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that was happening to Damien in Pacific Beach was that he would come home and his apartment would get larger or smaller, like Doctor Who's TARDIS. Yeah. He would go into his apartment, and one of his friends said, "Is your apartment getting larger?" In other words, it seemed to be growing on the inside, so that it was larger on the inside than it appeared on the outside. Or sometimes it would appear to shrink. And it wasn't just him who saw this. His friends noticed this as well. And just completely not prompted by anything we said. Richard goes, you can use this technology to make it look like a room is larger on the inside than it is on the outside. You can make it seem like it's smaller than it actually is. He goes, you could make a foreign dictator just go out of his mind thinking he's seen all kinds of crazy things. He goes, so it has psychological warfare advantage too. And just all the way down the line, point by point by point, he starts mentioning all the stuff that just aligns perfectly with Damien's experiences. And I had told Damien beforehand, I go, don't say anything. Just don't interrupt him, because when you interrupt someone, when you're interviewing them, you might cut off some essential, like point that they might bring up. I go, just wait until my signal. Don't say anything. So we would kind of like exchange like wide-eyed glances during these comments, but we didn't say anything. We just let them talk for the most part, and that whole conversation is in the book Chameleo. Yeah. Near the end, the first half of the conversation, I say, okay, I think it's time for Damien to tell you his story. And Richard like tenses up a little bit. You can tell like he seemed a little wary, like maybe we were about to sandbag him with something. Like he seemed like on guard, like, oh, what's this? What's this then? And Damien starts telling him the story, and I think you can see when you read the transcript of the conversation, I actually have to kind of step in at a few times to clarify things, because I think Damien was really spinning. I think his brain was spinning, because I really think that Damien was holding on to the hope that he actually was just crazy, because that's something that you can deal with. You can take pills or you can get help. That's something that's manageable. Him not being crazy, that's not so manageable. Yeah. And so here was confirmation at last. I mean, think about it. Like, you're being harassed by this thing, and you don't even quite know if it's happening or not. Then suddenly you're in the room with the guy who invented the technology. And so Damien starts telling him the story, and at first Richard looked like, what? What is this? But when Damien got to the part in the story when he said that he opened the medicine cabinet and he could briefly see the invisible people in the mirror, Richard, like, he leaned forward and he said, yes, that would make sense, because the technology is cloaking the person, but the mirror is not affected by that. And then when Damien said that sometimes he would see them as these little like auras, like little sparkling auras in the air, he leaned forward even further, and Richard said, that's exactly what it looks like when the technology is not working properly. And Richard knew that Damien would have Damien's not an optical physicist, neither am I. He knew that neither of us would know that. That's only, you would only know that if you had worked with this technology, and how many people had worked with it. Right. And that, but you can tell by the end of the interview, he's completely 100% convinced that Damien is telling the truth. And he goes, they needed a guinea pig, and you were there. You were a convenient guinea pig. I've had friends who I was talking to at the time, I was talking to my friends, fellow professors, about what was happening to Damien. And one of them said, why wouldn't they just do this experiment with this on Camp Pendleton? Why would they just pick some random guy and do it to him? And I said, because it has to be in real time. You pick someone who doesn't even know what's happening to see, when does the technology break down? You don't want to figure that out after you've already deployed it in a battle situation. You want to know when it breaks down before you get into a situation where you're dealing with people who have guns and who can shoot you. So this is the perfect opportunity. He had already pissed them off. So why not put him on the list? And I wouldn't doubt if that guy who stole the tank was going through some sort of similar situation. If you watch this documentary, Cul-de-sac, it's amazing, because it's happening in the same exact neighborhood where Damien was living, but just a few years before Damien got there. And I've, I thought that Damien talking to Richard was going to make him feel better, but instead, like I said, I think it made him feel worse, because he realized that all this stuff absolutely was occurring to him. and I actually kind of lost touch with him not long after that for a couple of years. And I I kind of tried to just put the whole thing out of my mind. Like I stayed in contact with Richard, but it was just too overwhelming. Like I didn't even know where to begin. How do you even begin writing all this? Like it just seemed like just a mess. Yeah. One of my favorite books that I discovered when I was 18 was is The Mothman Prophecies by John A. Keel. And later on, I realized that the events in that book take place in 67, 68, I think. But the book doesn't come out until like 75, something like that, 76. And in later interviews, John Keel talked about how it was so disturbing, everything that was happening, that he just tried to put it out of his mind at a certain point and just move on with his life and go on to other things. And it took him about 7-8 years before he could come back and actually write it down. But he had kept all these notes about what had happened. And in fact, there's a website dedicated entirely to archiving John Keel's notes, and you can see what a copious note taker he was. Well, I also had a lot of notes. I had a bunch of notes. I had conversations with Damien that I had recorded, conversations with me, like talking to other people about it while it was happening, and I recorded it just so that I could remember everything, all the dates and everything. So it was around about like 2010, the spring semester at CSU Long Beach, and I was teaching a class called The Literature of Science Fiction. And after class one day, a student came up to me and he said, "Hey," he goes, "can you think of anything that we think of, everyone thinks of as science fiction, but it's not?" And immediately I said, visibility technology. We think of that as science fiction, but it's not science fiction. And then I go into a kind of abbreviated version of the story I just told you. By the end of it, his jaw is like hitting the floor. And he goes, "Oh my God, can you tell this story in class, next class?" And I go, "Okay, well, just, remind me and I'll tell the story." When he left, I sat down, I crouched down in the middle of the hallway. I pulled a spiral notebook out of my bag, and I wrote down bullet points, everything I just said to him in the order that I said it. Yeah. And it's kind of like one of those kind of no-brainer things. Oh, just tell the story in chronological order exactly as it happened. Yeah. But for some reason, that didn't occur to me until I told the story out loud to this guy who had no knowledge of any of the characters involved or anything. And when I told him the story, it was just clarification. Okay, this is the way to tell the story so that someone else can understand it. And that page of bullet points became the outline for Chameleo that I then wrote that following summer. But the next time we had class, he reminded me to tell the story, so I did. I told the story to everyone in the class. Now, there was one guy in the class who was in the ROTC program, so he would come to class every day wearing full military uniform. Yeah. And he was very officious and very formal with me. He'd always say, "Sir." He'd raise his hand in the air and say, "Sir." And he, at the end of me telling the story, he stiffly raises his hand in the air and says, "Sir, I can't say, I cannot provide specifics, but what I can say is that in my training with the ROTC, I've been told things that align perfectly with the story you have just told us." Yeah. and everyone in the class was like, "What the fuck?" Because they thought I was, I don't know, spinning a yarn or something. I don't know what they thought, but they seemed skeptical. But then when he said that, they seemed a tad bit less skeptical. So it's amazing how synchronicity plays a huge role in the story. I mean, the student asking me that question at that exact moment, it led to me writing the book. Now, maybe I would have written it eventually later, but that's what sparked me to finally kind of break myself out of the self-imposed hypnosis I put myself in, because I just didn't want to deal with the insanity of it all. And also just the synchronicity of Damien. They chose Damien as a target, and they often choose people who they feel are isolated. Why not pick a drug addict? Why not pick someone who's homeless? Pick someone who has no credibility or has very few connections to family and friends, right? So they picked this guy, but they have absolutely no idea that they picked a guy who has a friend who's a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason in the lodge, where the guy who invented the technology is also a member.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that synchronicity is one thing, like, you just can't control that.
No, it's incredible, and it's something that's led me to where I am right now. I always got to pay attention to the universe's message, to the synchronicities that are occurring. It's super important in my reality. Now, we've got a few minutes left, Robert. I would love to get your insights into the implications of some of this technology as far as with what we're seeing now with ufology, the admittance by our own government, who has the best track record of always telling us the truth about everything, about UFOs and aliens, and the implications of what could have possibly been occurring over the decades when it comes to abductions and people's reports of some of this seeming technology that sounds a lot like what we've discussed now being involved in many of these cases, and as well as many of these cases where the individual will report a military presence along with extraterrestrials or something non-human, which is also interesting. And it also has implications into some things that we might just consider paranormal or poltergeists or hauntings. So what do you think about that?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, there is.
But I should point out, I wish I'd known this when I wrote Chameleo. I didn't find it out until later. Jose Delgado was one of the premier MKUltra mind control scientists. He was born in Spain, and he had done experiments in the 1950s that made the newspapers, where he cracked open the skull of a bull, and he put this implant into the bull's brain. And he hopped into a bull ring. Now, of course, this is Spain. The ultimate symbol of machismo is fighting a bull, right? So Delgado did this with remote control. He got into the ring with the bull, and he had a little remote control device under his the red cape, and he was able to make the bull walk backwards and forwards based on just pressing this button. Wow. That made the newspapers, and it got the attention of the CIA. And they gave him a cushy position at Yale, where he proceeded to do his research for many decades. So in the late 60s, he writes a book called Physical Control of the Mind. He experimented on female mental patients, prisoners, children. The female mental patients, he could instill orgasms remotely from afar. He could dilate the pupil of one eye while leaving the other eye unaffected remotely from another room. And this was all the purpose of this. The subtitle of the book is something like The Psycho-Civilization of Society. The whole point of this, and we're talking like a Clockwork Orange type of stuff here. You know, we're going to find out who the criminals are at birth, and then we'll psycho-civilize them, you know. And I had no idea. I knew who Jose Delgado was, and I had actually read Physical Control of the Mind because I was friends with Walter Boart, who wrote Operation Mind Control, which was the first important book about MKUltra that came out in, I think, 76 or 77. And it came out from Dell, a major publisher. And I knew Boart. I met him in the late 90s. So I had read Operation Mind Control. I was already familiar with who Jose Delgado was. And in fact, I write about Delgado in my first book, Cryptoschatology. Conspiracy Theory is Art Form. Cryptoschatology is a word I made up. It's Latin. Crypto is Latin for secret. Scatology means the study of shit. you put it together. It's a study of secret shit. There's a chapter in there called Honey, Did You Leave Your Brain Back at Langley Again?, which is all about Jose Delgado, Louis Jolyon West, and Gottlieb, all these MK Ultra scientists. Well, I didn't learn until after Chameleo was published that Jose Delgado retired. And when he retired to San Diego. He was living in the same exact area where Damien, when he was living in the same exact area as Damien.
Wow.
When all this happened to Damien in 2003. Supposedly he's retired, but I think maybe he was still having some fun in sunny San Diego.
That's highly possible, man.
And also, you mentioned the paranormal aspect of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting that SAIC was located right across the street in the Old Town area of San Diego. It was located right across the street from the Whaley House, which is infamous among paranormal investigators. It's known as the most haunted house in California. And I actually went there. I went to the Whaley House. In 2008, my friend and I drove to San Diego. We went back to Damien's apartment, and we actually charted the route. We followed the route from Damien's apartment to SAIC, and you know, it was, you could walk it. And across the street from SAIC was the Whaley House. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. It's like, did SAIC build it because there's something special about that location? I mean, you know, John Keel talks about window areas.
Yeah.
Areas where more paranormal events occur than in other areas. So did they build the location of SAIC? Did they build it there because there's something special about the geography, about this particular location? Mm-hmm. Or did they build it there so that when they're experimenting with their exotic technology, something weird happens, people just shrug and say, "Oh, isn't that where the Whaley House is?
Yeah.
Isn't that haunted location?" Right? The same with like the Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
And if you read Coleman Kelleher and George Knapp's book, there's weird parallels. If you read Chameleo and the two books like back to back, you see weird synchronicities between the two books. But, you know, if you want to experiment with exotic technology, why not pick a place that has the reputation of being haunted? Right. You know, then anything that you do would just be dismissed as just part of the local lore.
It just makes me wonder how long our military-industrial complex has been tinkering with some of these exotic technologies. You mentioned the case even in the 70s where it was a gentleman and his wife experiencing paranormal activity. If that was also a technology being used back then, how long has this been being implemented? I'm pretty sure that our military-industrial complex has cracked free energy or even off-planet type of technology.
It's interesting. You know, you mentioned MyLabs earlier. I don't know if you mentioned it by name, but you mentioned alien abductions in which there's also a military presence in the abduction. The two women I mentioned earlier, Melinda Leslie and Amisha Johnson, who interviewed me on that Transcending Reality TV show, they were both self-professed alien abductees, and yet both of them have also had these MyLab experiences, you know, being abducted by military people. And the MyLab experiencers claim that when they're re-abducted, first they're abducted by what appear to be aliens, and then they are returned, and then later they're re-abducted by military people. And often the experiences they have with the military are far more horrific than the experiences that they report in the presence of these ostensible extraterrestrials, which I think says something interesting about human beings. But it's interesting to note, and there's a researcher named Joe Montaldo who has his own podcast, and I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but I'm sure if you just Google Joe Montaldo podcast, you'll be able to find it. He's done a lot of research into Betty and Barney Hill, and it's obvious that they were MyLabs. There is also a military presence in their in their case as well, though it's very little known. You should think about talking to Joe Montaldo about Betty and Barty Hill. It's really fascinating the amount of research he did into that case. Originally, the first part of Chameleo that ever appeared anywhere, I published a brief excerpt from my interview with him in the pages of UFO magazine around about 2007. And the reason I published it there was because, you might think, well, it's ostensibly has nothing to do with UFOs. It's about optical camouflage technology. But it was William Burns' wife, Nancy Burns, who wanted to publish it in UFO magazine because she recognized the fact that this was significant, that it actually does tie into UFOs. I wanted people to be able to read it, the people who read UFO magazine, to read the interview with Richard, and they might come to their own conclusions. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe what I thought was happening to me is this other thing, Yeah. And I actually did, but at the same time, I don't want it to make it sound like I'm saying that all UFO, all paranormal phenomenon can be blamed on this.
Right.
There's a follow-up article I wrote called Invisible Predators in the pages of Nexus magazine in the winter of last year, like January, February of 2022. And it's a very long article, and it's called Invisible Predators, Strange Creatures, Secret Weapons, and Shadow Biospheres. And the main purpose of it was to sort of bring some emotional balance to the Fortean field, because I've seen some people use Chameleo as evidence for the claim that all paranormal phenomena, all UFO sightings, are the result of covert testing of exotic weapons. And in some cases that's true, but obviously, like when you read Charles Fort's stuff and he's talking about invisible beings, in Europe in 1899, I doubt that was SAIC, right? Because they didn't exist yet, So even Richard talks about how I think that Richard's optical camouflage technology could be described as like a cargo cult version of a phenomenon that already existed. Back in the old black and white Tarzan movies, you see like a pre-industrial native cultures, and they'll see a plane flying over, and then they build like a plane out of bamboo and worship it. Richard, and those are called cargo cults, right? Richard Schonger described to me how he started getting into UFOs in the 60s. Started reading books about it and became very interested in it. And he noticed that a pattern amongst all these reports was that UFOs would often either dematerialize, or they would teleport, or they would go invisible, and they had the ability to cloak themselves. And Richard got fascinated by that, and he thought, how could you replicate that with the technology we have today? And that eventually leads to him successfully getting the first patent in this technology in the early 90s. And so, it's almost like the natives looking up and seeing the plane and building some sort of replica of that. It's like Richard is looking at the UFO phenomenon and saying, how do you replicate that? So he tries to do his best to do that. And the Project Chameleo was the result of that. So you can see that he's responding to something that already existed.
Yeah, this is incredible. The book is amazing. I'm going to have the link right there in the description for everyone to easily access it. Robert, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to have to discuss more in the future. There's plenty more we could get into. You're right about all the topics that we love here. But before you go, if the audience would like to find out more about you, what's a good way they can do so?
I have a website, cryptoscatology.com. And all of my books are on Amazon. And I just published, September 1st, I published a new novel called Dead Monkey Rum, which is, if you're into cryptozoology, you probably be interested in Dead Monkey Rum. And I have another book, a collection of short stories coming out this January called Cryptopolis and Other Stories. I like the word crypto, obviously. Cryptopolis and Other Stories is coming out in January. And all my books are on Amazon.
Perfect. Robert, thank you so much. This was fantastic. We'll do it again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. And we'll see y'all then.